Hello, hello. Welcome back to Decoding the Flow, the podcast on creative consciousness. I am your host, Drica Lobo. And you know, this podcast, it's all about living by creation and not reaction. Today's conversation, it is especially meaningful to me because our guest and we met a few years ago during my artist in residency in France. And that was a season that profoundly changed me, not just in my creativity, but also for personal reasons. We're going to talk about this. But she's also our very first storyteller and a poet that we have in this podcast. Today, I am joined by Sabriaya Shipley, storyteller, poet, educator, and creative whose works explores identity, humanity, connection, and the power of stories to help us understand ourselves and each other. So please help me welcome Sabriaya to Decoding the Flow. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you, Drake. It's very beautiful to see you again and to be reconnected. And just to over these 2 years that we've like since we in the France kind of watch not only us to grow in our artistry, but our whole cohort. And so it's really beautiful to come and have this conversation. So thank you for
Yeah,
having me.
absolutely. So let's start a little bit to talk about your work exactly.
Mhm.
And you are located in Philadelphia.
Yes.
When was the first time that you started telling stories?
I think my first time telling stories had to be when I was very much a little girl. I was a very animated little girl, very charmed flower, as we like to call it, where I could sit for hours and just watch the rain. Or I like to observe people from an early age. My mom says and that's where I used to start telling my stories because I'd be like, "Ma, did you see that woman across the street? She was carrying these bags, and then this happened." And then she would go, "Okay, Sabrina." They would call me a nosy, and I was like, "No, Ma, I'm watching them." And I would tell the stories. And my mom was very much an encourager of my creativity. She didn't quite understand it. My grandmother was the one who really put in the notion of like telling stories versus telling lies and telling truths about the people you see. And she would do this in the way of I grew up in a very Southern Baptist household, which is very kind of Christian, but was also tied to a lot of cultural faith and cultural like practices. And my grandmother's very important of like when you're telling stories, make sure you write them down, make sure you find some way to document them. And I was first an oral storyteller, so telling the stories, and I would tell kids would gather to hear me tell these stories over a time. And then I became a writer to write down the stories because I was like, I forgot which story I told, who I told it to, right? And my first kind of like a real story was a story about a girl who was trapped in this kind of jungle, and the only way she could get out was to become this singer. And but she couldn't sing like she couldn't sing notes normally. She had to sing them very like clunky and clanky. And it was for I was in kindergarten, and they actually had me tell the story at a school assembly. And my mom was like, "All right, we might be on to something. We might be on to something." Because she's really into this. And that was the first beginning I told stories. And I've been telling stories ever since, in various different ways.
Tell me a little bit about your work besides in telling the stories. You also create art installations and
Mhm.
you teach. Tell me a little bit. So if people are like, yeah, a storyteller, but what exactly do you express that in what different ways that you use your creativity, not only to create stories, but to show to the world?
Yeah, I like to say I live by as a creative, as a storyteller, I live by the kind of phrase of being a jack of all trades, but people forget the later half of that, which is like master of none, which I like being. For me, I always sum it up as being very much a ethnographer, which for ethnography, it's kind of studying people and how they move through life. And for me, I center minds around community ethnography. So I invite community in everything I do to be a part of the various different ways we tell our story. And what that means is sometimes that means I'm tapping into multiple kind of disciplines to communicate because as a community, we're diverse. We communicate differently. We see things differently. So I've done a lot of installations centered around photography, centered around poetry That was how I first started out with my ethnography was doing poetic ethnography. So I would go and I would listen to community members and then I would write a poem about them and write a poem about what I saw. I did a lot of that in France when we met. And it's something that comes naturally to me. I'm very much a visual artist as well, mostly collage, because it allows me to collect from community and kind of put them into one big piece. And so when people ask me, like, what do you do, Sabrina? And I say storyteller, it sums it up. But I think also what sums it up is documenting community. It's, how do I take the voices that may not have been able to express themselves, who have passed on, who may also not have the ability or know how to artistically express themselves? How do I take it and I put it out in the world? So I've been blessed to have multiple avenues to express those stories and those community, and.
Yeah, absolutely. Why do you think us humans need stories so deeply?
I don't know if I didn't have a story to hold on to, I don't know if I could have the motivation to live this life the way we have to live it. Like I don't know if I could there's something about the story of the fact that a story is being written about me, even though I'm not even writing, like I'm just living my life, that motivates me. Like, what is a story that people will read about me years from now? And so it's like, you need to get out of bed because what page of the story is this? Is it going to be a dry one? Is it going to be one where we see you healing? Is it going to be one where we're seeing you, trapped and not choosing to live your full life? And then there's also the fact that stories, I feel like they're proof. They're proof that we lived. And when I think of people that have passed on in my life, and when I think of even people who are no longer in my life but still alive, but well, friendships you move on from, relationships, those things, it's like, oh, I would never have imagined that our story would go that way, or that there's some stories to look forward to, right? I know there's stories that I cannot wait to see how they unfold. And we need it as humans because it's how we kind of serve proof that we are not alone. Like there are stories about mothering, there are stories about being creatives. There are stories that we look at, we're like, oh my God, I'm not the only one who thinks this way. Someone wrote this story down, someone did this adventure too, and I can too. Maybe ours is a little different, but I can do it. And also because because of what the world we live in now, there is so much stories hold power because there are a lot of stories people will tell about you. People tell about your culture, about who you are as a person. People will tell, and if you don't take the pen and have it and be like, okay, this is actually the story. It's like you ever read a bad story? You're like, who wrote this? And it's nothing more frustrating than a bad story. There's nothing more frustrating than a wrong account of who you are. And so stories for me hold power because it's saying, no, 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 I'm gonna let you know what actually happened, who I actually am, what I actually hope for. So that's why we need stories that hope, and we need it for power.
Yeah. I mean, we've been telling stories since the beginning of time,
Mhm. Right.
right? And I think that is very beautiful what you said, but maybe also that's how we humans connect with each
Yeah.
other, right?
Yeah. I believe that. Well, the stories that we tell to each other, right, are ways of sometimes you can't really outright say what you want to say to somebody. And so you tell them a story. You go, I don't know about you, but I'll be like, let me tell you the story first.
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
I'm trying to make a point here, but let me tell you the story behind the point just to flush it out because sometimes that's all you have is a story in your heart to tell. Yeah, yeah.
Love it. Let's go back to France. We both experienced this beautiful artist in residency. It was back in July 2024.
Yeah.
And I'm going to share with you who are listening because I experienced one of the hardest time of my life. I went to France. I was waiting 4 years to realize this dream come true to be in France. And once I got there, at the next day, my dad, who was in Brazil, he went straight to the hospital. And after 3 or 4 days, he ended up passing away while I was in France. And I was so hard. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to share with the group because we were in about 20, 25 other artists. I didn't
Yeah.
want to share because everybody was really excited. I didn't know how to deal. and it was Sabriaya who first opened her wisdom, and she was the one who actually made me calm down. And it was so beautiful, such a sensibility that you have listening to stories, and then you ended up writing a whole poem, and it was so beautiful. Can you tell me if that sensibility that you have to listen to stories and to pass truth, it is that what do you consider most important of telling these stories? If
Yeah.
not, what would it be?
Yeah, that was a very the France experience was such a prolific experience for all of us, and because everybody was going through some kind of transformation, not only in their art, but in what they were feeling about themselves and who they were. And I remember us not seeing Drica for a day or two, and being curious as to where you had went and what was going on. And I think I didn't find out until I had brought out I had an oracle deck that I had brought with me, and the night before I had been reckless with Louise on the golf cart and kind of fell off at the golf cart. So I was very much chateau bound that day. And I decided to kind of get to know people more and sit and talk in the room. And it's part of something that's essential to stories. It's not necessarily also the accessibility, but it's also the vulnerability to be open
Mm.
to however the story goes, to where the story turns. Because when Drika sat down and she was like, "Yeah, Sabrina, can you please like do me?" And I could see, we all were like, something's going on, But and I had pulled out these three cards. I did past, present, and future for everybody, and I was sitting there. And Druga did brought up, yeah, my dad just passed away, and I remember everybody was also at the table was like, oh
Nobody knew back then because I
no,
didn't want to share. Everybody was so excited. I don't want to spoil this time. So I was stuck in my room for all these first 3, 4 days.
And we were like and I was like, "Hold on," and the cards I had pulled out, and I remember one of the cards was centered around the tower and things crumbling and things happening, and that's a part of the story that I like, no matter how painful it is. It's like, "Well, this took a turn. Wait."
And it was something that you said you have to do what you came here to do.
Yeah, yeah. That it was like because that's what the thing about stories is they have to come out. Like I truly believe that. I think that's the essential part of my storytelling is like I don't know when, where, how the story has to come out, but I know that once it's in my head and once it's in my mind, it has to because because the universe, God, whoever that you believe in wouldn't have put it in your brain if it wasn't meant to at some point, especially when it's a creative, you can feel in your soul when it's an idea that's like, oh, that has to happen. I have to tell this. And so when we sat there and I'm sitting here and I'm reading, like and let's be clear, I do not take any appointments to do oracles or tarot. I'm just,
It's just
I
part of the practice that you
yeah,
do.
it's part of my own spiritual practice, my own kind of like finding alignment with myself and my stories. Be like, what is happening in this story right now?
Mm.
Like, and I had different oracle decks and for that to be like, what is this story? Like, what is happening here? And a part of it was when you get when you tell a story as a storyteller, you have to be open to giving, but you can't predict how it's going to be received and what the audience that is listening to your story is going to give back to you. Right? And so while I was in France, I also made an altar, which is also a central part of my like art as a very spiritual person. And I'd asked everyone in, the residency, hey y'all, part of my like studio showcase, I want to have an altar in my studio. Would you be willing to give something? And when I tell you that it was crazy how like I just met these people and like we were sitting there and I was like, no one's gonna bring anything down to this place. I mean, people were bringing me things like you talk about being open to receive and also being open to what's being given. I mean, we had someone gave me their grandmother's paint cloth that they had brought with them that they used to paint. Someone gave me, I think it was a Kenna, who brought me the earrings she had brought on her first kind of like out of the country trip when she was young. You had people who were bringing me like Drica made me a whole paint. It's on my wall right now, but a whole painting. And then I had people paint things, cultivate things. I had people bring, pieces of like things that they kept safe for them. to like for their travels and trusting me with it, right? And that is a central part of storytelling. Do you trust who is telling the story? You know, and I am trusted to tell the story. I have been so my mom would always say, Sabriya, tell me what happened. Right. Because one thing about it was I was truthful. And you have to be truthful in your art, right? So like if you're not truthful in your art, it doesn't necessarily land.
Yeah.
People can tell
Yeah.
when you're not being truthful,
So true.
right? And you're like,
Before we go deeper, I want to share something with you. There was a time that I never felt like I could fit in. Something in me, this firework of colors that wants to be expressed, but I didn't feel like I had permission to be that person. And the truth is, artists, the creators, the people that I would look up for, they all embody everything that I was. But I never felt like I could be until I realized something was missing. I just needed to be in spaces and around people who held me there. Because if you don't dare, you can spend the entire lifetime just thinking that nothing else is possible. And that's why I created the Creative Flow activation. It's not only a 12-day course program, it's a return to who you are before you start holding yourself back. But if there's something inside of you that is ready to come back to life, join the waitlist. You can find the link below, and I'll see you there. Now back to the episode.
I don't know where that came from, but that is not your truth. You know, and you're like, okay. But for me, I was snitching myself when I was a kid. Like, and snitch being like I would tell myself when I was a kid. If something went down, I would say, this is what I did, this is what the person did, this what happened. But I always told the truth, the story, and then I allowed the story to lift me into telling. And so when with Drica sharing this knowledge with us, it was crazy how the story of France unfolded, how open we were to storytelling with each other. There was a part where I wrote the poem. I was writing poems, you know, and I don't just write poems for anybody. Jesse, who is one of my good friends from France, always says that Sabriya has a poem about you. She really does care. Like there's a certain care that she's putting into that. Because not everyone who tells you a story or who's giving wants you to receive the story and interpret the story or listen to the story. Sometimes people just talk dog sometimes. And then sometimes people are talking to connect, to tell the story. And when Drica was when you were telling about your dad and and you were in your studio and we would come visit and, you know, when I wrote that poem, it was a notion of connection of the different planes that you exist on when someone transitions. And that, y'all, it turned to a whole thing. Like it really
You
turned.
what? I seriously, I didn't know what would my life there be if it wasn't for you. First, you were the first one who I share what
Mhm.
was happening after 4 days. We were supposed to be there for 2 weeks. So the first week of studio time that was supposed to be, I was inside my room, locked in my room. When I
Yeah.
finally was able to share in Sabriaya, got the deck cards to give me some sort of direction because at that time I didn't know if I should go back to Brazil and stay with my family, and all of my family saying, don't come here, you stay there, you stay there. And at the same time, I was like, what am I supposed to paint? What am I supposed to do?
Mm.
But then when we sat down at the table and you say all of the things you are here to do, what you came here to do, it sort of gave me that insight of I'm not here to paint pretty, beautiful paintings. I'm here to express myself. And that was exactly the shift that I needed. So yes, I did lose my first entire week of studio time, but I ended up creating 6 large paintings at the last 6. I was so prolific.
Gorgeous paintings, but like out of this world. We were so like
Different to what I normally do because it would be impossible to create something similar because it was so painful. But then, like you said, it was everybody else was dealing with their own personal things and they all intertwined somehow. So I always remember because we ended up doing a farewell of my father. We prayed
Mhm.
in Portuguese and everybody, we light candles. And I don't think it would be a most beautiful and poetic way to honor him if it wasn't for that group and not that space. And I remember for the entire time I was trying to find the why that would happen exactly that time. And then when I finally realized it's not my timeline.
That right. But that's so Like, that's it. Like, it's not your it's sometimes it's not your story. Sometimes, like, when I say I did not I'm telling y'all all who listening, we didn't know anything. Like, we didn't know anything until Driga sat down at that like, literally, just
Of day
imagine
5, yeah.
day 5, we're just sitting there chilling. And when I say this group, like the story sometimes what I love as a storyteller, like I said, the twists and the turns, but also when you realize the power in storytelling, and I have to remind myself this all the time because the world can get in my head and make you feel stuck. But when you realize as a storyteller, when you talk about this flow, this decoding the flow, right? Is realizing that you are not necessarily always in control. You
Mm,
can control what you can. You control like when you need to express what is being put into your spirit, right? But sometimes I truly believe something is placed in me that I always talk about when I'm performing on stage or storytelling. Sometimes I'm not even present. It is me, Sabriya, the storyteller, that is coming into the room, and the story, like that writing those poems or that day just doing those cards or sitting and talking for hours by the fire and all those things, truly feel it was us allowing the creative spirit to use us to say, okay, Drika needs to hear this right now, Sabria. It may not be what you want to say, but this is what she needs to hear. And I'm like, okay, I just need to say this to you, right? And it's allowing that, but also because when I say it was a beautiful experience, we had a wedding and a memorial in the same day
yeah,
within hours of each other. And it was the most like, you would think that we had known each other as a collective for months, maybe years, and no, we had just known each other at that point for maybe 7 days, and we were sitting here, and I'm officiating the wedding, and then we're turning around after dinner, and we're like, "Alright, let's go down with the candles, and let's gather around Rika and pour in our love and our support," and that was wild to me because it was free.
yeah.
Yeah.
It was very, very beautiful. Let's talk about flow. And I
Mhm.
love when you say it's like it wasn't me telling, it was something that was given to you, which
Yeah.
is the flow, which is that feedback loop that we have when you are creating. So it's almost like we are just a conduit to
Yes.
something larger that your intuition or your creative muse or whatever
Yeah.
that is. But we also do need to be open, and the only way that we need to
Mhm.
be open to received is by shutting down our inner critic.
True.
So, do you have any sort of rituals to
Mm.
be able to open to receive? Like, how do you go by your day to day in your creative life?
I say one of the things that I have been I'm in the shift mode right now in this season of my life, as I realized that I went through a season where I was allowing all the downloads to happen and I was just flushing them through, getting them out, right? And without like my friends would tell you, I'm the one who would say, "They said, Bria, you gonna publish this book?" I say, "Yeah, and I don't care how many people buy it. It just has to be colors." Like I don't, I was that kind of person, and then as I let the inner critic get in, and the inner critic fried my whole nervous system. It wasn't until I actually got to France was the first time I had written any type of poetry in about 8 months. And I remember being in Jesse's studio in France and being like, my body is screaming at me. My mind, my spirit is screaming at me. This is what I was meant to do. And why am I letting these critics?" And I left my job the following year. I was like, I need to be free. And I'm now healing my nervous system. And so rituals that become important to me are I have to, some way, somehow, I have to sit in silence at some point in my day, whether it is for 5 minutes or for a whole hour. I have to sit and and I live in the city. So silence doesn't mean for me like complete silence, but it means, am I sitting in the park and just allowing myself to hear the world at play? And that means I'm hearing children's laughter. I'm hearing an adult conversation over there of an elderly couple who's been married for 30 years, right? Or I'm hearing this mom who's frustrated and giving tears because her toddler is refusing to leave the park, right? Or am I hearing the ice cream truck and remembering when I used to love to chase after it? Like, what are these things? And I'm getting back into, I always carry a journal with me because I always believe that that's a line that my teacher used to say, that's a line. So I have to have a line a day. Like if what is something that popped in your head? What flew into your head? Let me write it down in my book. right? It might be turned to a poem, it might turn to a play, it might turn to a portrait session I need to do, but what is it, right? And then I think also music. I have to listen to I have to get an hour at least of music in my body. I have to move my body for at least 30 minutes. And I say move, I mean dance and lip sync and like music is going. And I have to do that because it reminds me of flow. Because I'm not predicting my movements. I'm not predicting what it is. The thing is on shuffle, and I'm Aquarius, so my music selection is very crazy, and so it could go from gospel to rock and roll like that, and I'd be like, okay, cool, but they're all connected to me, right? They all flow, and these are things that have grounded me. A constant, always grounding for me will be and recently I found a word for it. Every day I wake up in the morning and I thank God, the universe, spirit, and my ancestors for just another day to tell my story, to write it. And I mean that. From the time I open my eyes, I say, okay, thank you. I made it to another day where I get to do this. And do I say it loudly? Do I say it begrudgingly? Sometimes. Sometimes it is thank you, but I do not wish to rob this bed. And sometimes I feel the need, okay, we're not gonna get out of bed today. But there's days where I'm like, thank you. Okay. I get to get up right now and do this. And I don't I'm learning not to beat myself up for how it flows. That's what the real truth is for me. The ritual is, can you do your ritual on your darkest days and on your lightest days?
Yeah, that is so important. We tend to be so hard in ourselves that we don't even
Mhm.
realize it. Thank you so much for sharing. You mentioned something that when you were in France, you weren't writing poems. Do you
Mhm.
consider this as a creative block that you've ever experienced? Would you like to share? And also, what those creative blocks were trying to teach you
Yeah.
based in your experience?
Who was I creative block? Yes. I was at the time, I was an executive director of a nonprofit, and in nonprofit life, it could be crazy. It's wild, And I was executive director running a whole theater industry company with 2 employees, and then I was one of them. And my all my creativity was going towards the production of this theater company and others. Like, it was all of my creativity, and it was the first time in my life that I was too tired to write, because I've always, even when I was in college working 3 jobs, I was like, "Something getting written tonight." You would gather with your friends. Even when I was post-college and I was working, like, 4 gigs, teaching artists here, I would be on the train, like, writing. And for some reason, I had done that so much and it got to that point where for that past, like, 8 months, my nervous system was so on fire because I received being executive director and being a Black woman, a woman of color, period, in this industry as of nonprofit or in art. No one gives grace, no one gives room for the flow. They expect you to ride the flow and if the flow does not complement them, you must adjust, even though your body is saying, no, 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 this pace is not it. And so there was a creative block, but it also was an emotional block. It was a block of like accepting that I was allowing certain things to be said to me in ways that my creative body was like, no, let's be creative and tell them a story. Let's tell them something about themselves, right? But I wasn't doing that. I wasn't listening to I wasn't listening in silence. I wasn't sitting in silence. And if I was in silence, it was because I was begging for sleep to like really get back into creativity. And what I learned was we need creativity to survive. We need it as a reminder to our existence, as a testimony. Our very being is creation. And so that to me was like, I remember it was the first time in months that I was talking to people who I wanted to write beautiful things about them. And when I was in my job working in stressed and stretched, I didn't wanna write beautiful things about people or stories. I wanted to write about the injustices I was experiencing. And when I was with y'all, I wanted to write about beautiful things again, about grief, and I wanted to cry it out. And what ended up happening to release that creative block, I ended up getting diagnosed with an autoimmune disease shortly after I left France. And contributed to me running my body and that creative block, that particular job that had me running to this like block and being so nervous to create because I was nervous someone's going to critique it in a way. And I mean, I was still getting these awards, and these accolades, a year right after I was awarded from my college as a 30 under 30, listed as a vision arts and culture visionary. And I was like, who is that? You talking about me? Like me? Sabria? And I had friends and family who reminded me, they were like, but you are. Just because that you had that creative block and it blocked the flow. When you remove that block and the river returns, you better be ready. And it reminds me of my favorite quote by Naira Wahid. And I'm paraphrasing when I say this, that you could be it's called Soft River. It's called Options. And in it, Wahid is saying, okay, you could either be a burning wrath towards the obstacle coming your way, or you can soft river your way to freedom. And I was like, and I'm just getting back to my soft river at this season. Now, have I been creating? Yes. But when I moved that block, it was like, but there's still blockages. I'll tell you why. I went to get what is the color thing where you get like your aura, my aura red. And the aura literally was, as you can imagine, reds and oranges going over my head. And at the top was like these purplish colors. And then in the photo, you can literally see right above my heart is another purple spot. Nowhere else in my body is there any color but that purple spot. And the reader said, it seems like you are a person who gets all these downloads, these stories, and you get them and they flow right out, right?
Wow.
But she said, there's a blockage happening right here in your heart because you're thinking about everything. You think about it, but you're not feeling it. And I was like, what do you mean? She was like, you're not feeling the downloads are happening and they're coming out of you, but there's still a spot of you that's trapped in here because you're not allowing yourself to feel. And I think that is where a lot of our creative blocks happen. We don't want to feel because to create is the most vulnerable to create anything, to create life, create your art, to create, even to write a letter to someone is creation. And it requires you to feel immensely. And being a storyteller means that you may tell a story and no one claps. No one shows up to hear your story. Will you still tell a story, even if nobody shows up to hear it?
Oh, that is so beautiful. I love we're talking about creativity. To me, creativity is a muscle, but it's
Mm.
also creativity. It's when consciousness remember its power.
Yeah. Yes, yes.
So, if someone listening today feels disconnected from themselves, from creativity, or from their voice, where would you invite them to begin?
With the mirror.
Wow.
When I say Uh, when when I think of my relationship to the mirror over the course of my creativity as an artist, because I started out in theater, and so the image is everything. What do I look like before I get on stage? Is my makeup right? Is the hair correct? Am I look the part of the character? Right. And when I started writing poetry, I had a teacher, shout out to Dr. Kamika Williams Witherspoon. She would have us do the mirror exercise, and I hated it. I said, because my makeup wasn't done and my hair wasn't done, and I was just authentically Sabria. But then it's strange how the mirror, when you have done the work and you allow yourself to flow, how the mirror becomes more of a comfort, a reminder that you're still there,
Mm.
like I still want to see myself in the mirror. And I think as someone who likes telling stories and also loves theater, when I look in the mirror now, I see my mom, I see my grandmother, I see the laugh that my friends say I have, right? Sometimes I'll laugh in the mirror and I'll be like, is that what I look like to my friends when I'm like over here, like telling jokes? The mirror will always, and the mirror is not always a metaphor, right? Like something. For me, the mirror is literal. The mirror is literally, there was someone who said this like notion of when we look in the mirror, do you realize it's 100, like all these different things had to come to play for you to look the way you look? Like your relatives all like all of the genes and the DNA had to mix so that you're like, this is what I look like. And I see that in how we interact with ourselves around mirrors. Do you change when you get in front of a mirror? Are you performative in front of a mirror?
I love this so much because I did a solo show talking about creative blocks. That
Yeah.
one of the things that I believe that happens, people they started performing instead of express their true self. I love this. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and it's important because forever. Yeah. Yeah. I received a Teaching Artist Award from the Bartell Foundation, in Philly.
Congratulations.
Thank you, thank you. It's an award for, teaching artists who have been working in Philly for a while who are making a pivot in their career, and I have a curriculum and a program called the Ebon Youth Project that was a part of, like, my master's thesis that was supposed to turn into a out-of-school program or some sort of program where I taught kids how to interact with archives and tell stories through them, and with this award, I've been, like, given kind of some room to take it to the next level and to actually apply with some of the youth that I've like seen grow up over the years and invite them to explore archives with me and to kind of create and find their own kind of way of storytelling. So I'm very excited about that. I also just received a residency called the Powerhouse Residency that I'll be going to this summer in Catskills, New York. And the Powerhouse Residency is primarily for Black women and women of color who are writers, but also are performers or visual artists. And it's a solo residency, but you would like to have collaborators. And for me, it's very exciting because this past 2 years, as I've been releasing my creative block, I've been leaning into telling the story of my matriarchy and the women around me who are all mothering in many different ways and how we mother and why we mother. And so that's been a journey. I've called it Many of the Mothers Project. And my own mother is going to join me on this residency to kind of do some co-writing together on a piece that we want to like have incorporated into the project. So I'm excited for that. It's her first artist residency. She's
Wow,
looking for a
this
collaborator.
and
Looking
I
forward to it.
can't wait to follow along that experience that you are going to have.
Yeah.
Congratulations, that's amazing.
Thank you.
So, where does people can find you and check out your writing or your teachings or your projects?
Yeah. So my website is my name, sabriayashipley.com. Sabria is spelled in a very interesting way. Sabriaya, and then Shipley, Shipley.com. It's sort of my all-in-one kind of portfolio, but also website. It's interactive as well. I'm on Instagram at Ubuntu Sab. It's my private account, but I probably will add you. But it's UBUNTUSAB, Ubuntu meaning I am because we are. And then my public account is somewhere between God and God Mammy, and Mammy being MAMMY. And so that's my public if you want to follow along on that journey. I post on both. And so please reach out and follow along.
Thank you so much. I'm going to make sure to add all of your information in the show notes. Follow along your beautiful creative journey. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, for telling the stories, and for all of the work that you do. If you love listening to this episode, please write in the comments what was your biggest takeaway. Also, don't forget to share with someone who may need to be inspired today. Subscribe to the podcast. That
Thank
is
you.
one of the best free ways that you can support this project. Thank you so much. I will see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.